Hello and welcome once again to this lesson. We are looking at transposing instruments. Transposing instruments. In this video, we want to look at the wind instruments, the brass wind instrument that basically are transposing instruments. Now first, let's begin by looking at the meaning of transposition. Transposition refers to the process or operation of moving a collection of note pitches up or down in pitch by a constant interval. The moment these note pitches are moved by a constant interval, then that is what transposition is. Now let's look into transposing instrument. What do we mean? How do we define it? A transposing musical instrument, therefore, is an instrument that produces a higher or lower pitch than indicated in music written for it. Examples like the clarinet, the French horn, the saxophones. Now let's look at them. The French horn, the clarinet, the saxophone, they have their various registers. When you play them, they sound a little bit different from what is written. So that interval, that difference is what makes them transposing instrument. Now, other transposing instruments include the tuba, the trombone, and the trumpet. Basically, all the brass wind instruments, they are transposing instruments. We equally have some wood wind instrument that transposes. Now, how do you transpose with a transposing instrument? For this lesson, we are going to be listening to Dr. Richard Hoffman. He's going to take us through what transposing instruments are and how do we transpose with them. That will take us to the end of this class.
Hello, my name is Dr. Rick Hoffman and I teach music theory at Belmont University. This video provides a basic introduction to instrumental transposition. It won't teach you everything you need to know about writing for instruments, but it will show you how transposition works and how to read transposing instruments in a score. On most instruments, the note you play is exactly the note you hear. On a flute, for example, if you play the note C, it'll sound like a C. Or, to explain it another way, the pitch will match the pitch on a piano. This is the same for oboe, bassoon, trombone, violin, cello, and many others. Sometimes we say these instruments are in C. When they play a C or any other note, that's exactly what you hear. Other instruments are called transposing instruments. You may have heard someone talk about trumpet in B flat or say that alto sax is in E flat. That refers to the fact that these instruments are transposing instruments. Most trumpets, most clarinets, horn, all the saxophones, English horn, and a few others are transposing instruments. These instruments aren't in C. In other words, the note in the score and the note the player is playing don't match the note on a piano. So how do we figure out the sounding pitch? I like to start with a basic formula that works for virtually every transposing instrument. When you see a C, you sound the name of the instrument. Let me say that again. When you see a C, you sound the name of the instrument. On a B-flat instrument, like a B-flat trumpet or B-flat clarinet, a written C will sound a B-flat. On horn in F, a written C will sound an F. Alto sax is in E-flat, so a written C will sound E-flat. So let's think clearly here about what's happening. When a B-flat trumpet player sees a written C in the score, she fingers a C, she plays a C, but the sound she makes is a B-flat. Or if you played that note on a piano, it would be a B-flat. So she's seeing a C, reading a C, for all practical purposes playing a C, but the sounding pitch is B-flat. A horn player playing horn in F sees a written C in the score, fingers a C, but the sound on a piano would be F. Someone playing alto sax sees a C, fingers the note C, but the sound of the pitch would be E-flat. So on a transposing instrument, what you see in the score isn't the actual note that sounds. It's been changed, it's been transposed. Let's see if we can apply this. Using our formula, see a C, sound the transposition of the instrument, we can figure out the interval of transposition for every instrument. If a written C sounds like a B-flat on a B-flat trumpet or B-flat clarinet, we know that the sound is always a major second lower than the notation. So a written C will sound B flat, that's a major second. The notation will always be a major second higher than the sound. And so a written G will sound like F. A written E flat would sound like D flat. A written C sharp would sound like B. If we saw music notated in the key of E, it would sound in the key of D. How about for English horn? English horn is in F. So a notated C, a written C, would sound like F, and so the sound is always a perfect fifth lower than the notation. And so a written D would sound like G, a written A flat would sound like D flat, and F sharp would sound like B. If we saw English horn music in the key of A, it would sound in the key of D. Alto sax in E flat. A written C sounds E flat, so the sound is a major sixth lower than the notation. A major sixth below D is F. A major sixth below B flat is D flat. A major sixth below F sharp is A. And if we saw alto sax music in the key of E, it would sound a major sixth lower in the key of G. We also haven't talked about how to know if the sound is higher or lower than the notation. All the examples we've seen, the sound has been lower, but that isn't always the case. Where this isn't true is for the instruments that are smaller and higher than the standard instrument. So trumpet in D or trumpet in E flat, for example, are smaller instruments that play high music. They're smaller than the B flat trumpet, and so they transpose higher. So a trumpet in D would be a major second higher. Trumpet in E flat would be up a minor third, would sound a minor third higher than written. The smaller E flat clarinet sounds above the written pitch, but the larger E flat alto clarinet sounds below. So while most transposing instruments sound lower than written, the exceptions are the small, high-pitched instruments that sound higher than written. But the basic formula still works. Even if you aren't sure if the sound is higher or lower, you can still get the letter names right, and that'll go a long way toward reading the score correctly. The saxophone family presents an interesting case. For practical purposes, there are 6 instruments in the sax family, from the very small sopranino in E flat to the bass sax in B flat. There is actually a 7th, the enormous and very rare contrabass sax in E flat, but I'll let you look that one up on your own. In between are the 4 most common: soprano in B flat, alto in E flat, the tenor in B flat, and the baritone in E flat. All the saxes are in either B flat or E flat, and the key alternates as we go up and down in size. Now saxophones all play from the same notation. Parts are all written in treble clef, and the written ranges are all very similar, but the transposition makes them sound quite different. Soprano in B flat sounds a major second lower than written. Alto sax, as we have seen, sounds a major sixth lower than written. The tenor sax sounds a major ninth lower than written. And the bari sax sounds a major 13th lower than written. So even though the notation is all the same, they all read treble clef, the sound is quite different, and this is because of the transposition. The sax family also illustrates one of the central reasons why we have transposing instruments to begin with. Saxophone music is written in the same clef, and the fingerings are all very similar. If the music weren't transposed, a sax player who played different instruments would have to learn 4 or 5 or even 6 different fingerings and read staff notation over a 5-octave range. Transposition allows the instrument to sound where it best fits the size and timbre or tone color of the instrument, but it simplifies the fingerings and the notation so all the instruments in the family can be played with the same basic fingerings. The same idea applies to the trumpet family, the clarinet family, and a few others. Rather than make the players learn lots of different fingerings or to transpose music on the fly, the transposition happens during the composition or arranging phase, and that just makes things easier and more consistent for the players. Let's get a little more practice. Here's an unusual instrument, the alto flute in G. A written C will sound a G, so the sound is a perfect fourth lower than the notation. Or, to turn that around, the notation is a perfect fourth higher than the sound. So let's practice this the other way, going from the sound to the notation. If you want to sound an F sharp, you'd have to write a perfect fourth higher, a B. Perfect fourth higher than A flat is D flat. The sound in E, you'd have to write a perfect fourth higher, or A. If you wanted the alto flute to play in the key of E flat, you would have to write the part in the key of A flat. Let's think about the two most common clarinets, clarinet in B flat and clarinet in A. Now, by now we're familiar with transposition. On the B flat clarinet, a written C will sound a B flat, or a major second lower than written, and on the clarinet in A, a written C will sound an A, a minor third lower than written. Sometimes the choice of instruments within a family is for range or tone color, or sometimes it's for very practical reasons, and that's often the case with the clarinets. Sometimes a transposed part ends up in a very good key or a very strange key. Let's think about each of these. A score in the key of E would be in F sharp on a B flat clarinet, but the key of G on an A clarinet. Given the choice, most players would rather play in G than in F sharp. A score in F would be in what key? Would be in G on a B flat clarinet, and the key of A flat on an A clarinet. Now, both of these keys are okay. The player here might make a choice just based on timbre, but might rather play in G. Finally, think about a score in the key of E flat. On a B flat clarinet, it would be in the key of F, but on the A clarinet, it would be in the key of G flat. Most players would definitely rather play in F. Finally, let's look at an instrumental score. Now, I have to admit this is a strange combination of instruments, but it'll serve our purposes of getting some practice. Look at all the mismatched key signatures here. That should tell you that some of the instruments are probably transposing. You know that the oboe and the trombone are not transposing instruments. They will sound in the key they're written in. So the oboe will sound an F sharp, the trombone will sound a D. But let's think about the others. The English horn, as we know, is in the key of F, but even if we didn't know that, we could make a pretty good guess by looking at the relationship between the key signatures. D is a perfect fifth lower than A, so the sound must be a perfect fifth lower than the notation. And so the written E would sound an A. Clarinet in A sounds a minor third lower than written, and so the F would sound a D. The alto sax in E flat sounds down a major sixth, and so the D sharp would sound an F sharp. Horn in F is sounding a perfect fifth lower, and so the A would sound like D. The trumpet in B flat sounds a major second lower, and so the B would sound like A. Finally, on the bottom, the trombone, the written D, would of course just sound like D. And so all that together makes a D major triad. So what have we learned? When you see a C, you sound the transposing key of the instrument. That will give us the interval between the written pitch and the sounding pitch. The pitch usually sounds lower, except in a few small, high-sounding instruments, but in any case, the letter name of the pitch will still be correct. Once you know the interval between the written and the sounding pitch, you can transpose any part. So that's our introduction to instrumental transposition. If you want more information, there are lots of resources on the internet, especially charts that show the basic transposing intervals. Orchestration books, and there are several good ones, will show all the transpositions and give specific information about writing for each instrument. But this should get you started reading scores and looking at transposed parts. I'm Dr. Rick Hoffman at Belmont University, and thank you for watching.